History tells us Africa was silent, waiting, empty. But silence is often manufactured. And emptiness is sometimes the result of deliberate removal. What you are about to hear is not speculation. It is not fantasy. It is not mythology dressed as hope. It is a reconstruction of a truth that once shook the world and frightened it enough to be hidden. Before ships crossed the Atlantic, before Europe crowned itself the center of civilization, before the modern world decided who mattered and who did not, Africa was already watching the stars, already recording time, already governing millions. And somewhere in that vast land stood an empire so organized, so wealthy and so advanced, that its existence alone contradicted everything we were later taught. This empire did not fall because it was weak. It disappeared because it was dangerous. To a narrative that needed Africa to be seen as nothing. Long before colonization, long before borders were drawn by foreign hands, Africa was not a single story. It was a continent of systems, trade systems, legal systems, educational systems. Cities rose with intention. Roads connected regions. Knowledge was stored, debated, and passed forward. Gold did not define this empire. Control of gold did. While other regions fought for land, this empire mastered movement. Caravans crossed deserts with mathematical precision. Routes were protected. Markets were regulated. Nothing moved without permission. And because of this, foreign economies trembled at African footsteps. There are records, quiet ones, of rulers whose journeys caused inflation abroad, because they gave away so much wealth. That gold itself temporarily lost value. That is not legend. That is economic impact. At the heart of this power were cities the world rarely mentions. Cities with libraries, universities older than Oxford, centres of astronomy where the sky was not worshipped blindly, but measured. Scholars debated medicine, geometry, ethics, and governance. Knowledge was not hoarded by kings. It was preserved by communities. And power did not rely solely on armies. It relied on legitimacy. Rulers were not simply born. They were confirmed by councils, by traditions, by systems that ensured continuity. This was not chaos. This was civilization, running parallel to the rest of the world, until the world decided only one story could remain. Foreign travelers arrived. Some came to trade. Some came to learn. Some came to observe. They wrote letters home describing cities larger than theirs. They recorded customs more complex than expected. They admitted, quietly, that Africa was not what they were told. But admiration soon turned into anxiety, because an advanced Africa raised a dangerous question.
If Africa had always been capable, then who needed saving? And if Africa needed no savior, then what justified conquest? That question could not be allowed to spread. So the language changed. Advanced cities became settlements. Universities became gatherings. Engineering became coincidence. African intelligence was reframed as luck. African governance as imitation. African spirituality as superstition. And slowly, deliberately, the story was narrowed. Maps were simplified. Timelines were shortened. Credits were reassigned, not overnight. Systematically. This empire did not collapse in flames. It was dismantled in ink. Through omission. Through silence. Through the repetition of lies so often. They became memory. And yet, something remained. Not in books, but in oral history. In symbols carved into stone. In ruins that refused to explain themselves away. In stories passed quietly, generation to generation, away from listening ears. Truth does not vanish. Comma. It waits. If you are still listening, understand this. History is not just what happened. It is what survived being rewritten. And the fact that this story still echoes, despite centuries of erasure, means the attempt to silence it failed. This is only the beginning. Because now that the foundation has been uncovered, the next question becomes unavoidable. What happened next? And who made sure you never learned it?
Power attracts attention. But power that contradicts a global narrative attracts something far more dangerous. Fear. The moment outsiders understood what Africa truly represented, the relationship changed. Trade turned into observation. Observation turned into strategy. And strategy turned into control. They came not with armies at first. They came with questions. Questions about gold. Questions about roots. Questions about leadership. They studied governance quietly. They learned where authority flowed. They took notes. Because conquest is easiest. When you understand what you intend to break. The first strike was not violent. It was intellectual. Stories began to shift. African achievement was reframed as coincidence. Systems were described as primitive. Knowledge was called imitation. And slowly, the image of Africa was reduced. From originator to participant. Then came extraction. Gold was removed without balance. Artifacts were taken without context. Sacred objects were displayed as curiosities. Libraries were dismissed. All historians were ignored. Because written proof could be archived. Spoken truth could be denied. Conflict followed. Not always open war. Sometimes division. Sometimes proxy rulers. Sometimes carefully planted instability. Empires don't always fall from invasion. Some collapse. When trust is poisoned. Cities weakened. Trade routes were disrupted. Scholars were scattered. What could not be destroyed was removed. What could not be removed was discredited. And what could not be discredited was erased entirely. When colonial control solidified, the final act began. History was rewritten. Africa was repositioned as beginning only when Europe arrived. Everything before that became prehistory. And prehistory requires no respect. This was not ignorance. It was design. Because a continent with a remembered past is harder to dominate, and a people who know who they were are dangerous to those who benefit from their silence. Yet even then, something went wrong. The erasure was incomplete. Fragments remained. Ruins refused to disappear. Oral history continued in whispers. Truth slipped through cracks. And now, centuries later, those cracks are widening because lies require constant maintenance. Truth only needs time.
Africa did not begin in chains. Africa did not wait to be awakened. Africa was interrupted. And in